October.
I'm most impressed by the optimism which the Minister expresses as to the progress of the negotiations. We all hear reports that the Government has presented 3 sides of paper as its proposals so far in Brussels. It doesn't seem that either the pace or the detail has got very far yet. Given that, and given that business and the civil service are struggling with uncertainty in how far they take preparations for a no-deal at the present moment, and that uncertainty is very damaging for the economy and for our society as a whole, and given that Operation Yellowhammer, insofar as we've been allowed to read the reports, suggests that the outcome of a no-deal will be disastrous, would it not be helpful if the Government were now to say that if the negotiations do not make sufficient progress, it will shortly ask to extend Article 50?
Well, the Noble Lord's been reading the wrong newspapers. We are optimistic about the progress of the negotiations. There is indeed an official level delegation conducting technical discussions in Brussels today. The Prime Minister met with Leo Varadkar yesterday. My Secretary of State in my department met with Michel Barnier last Friday, and intensive discussions took place over a number of days last week. So we are optimistic on getting a deal, and we are going to leave the EU on the 31st of October.
Reading the tweets avidly as I do, I see that somebody is still briefing that whilst the letter asking for an extension, as required in this Act, will be sent by the Prime Minister, it might be accompanied by another one saying, "But please don't say yes." Could the Noble Lord, the Minister, confirm there will be no attempt to circumvent the Act, and that any legal advice from the Attorney-General will be double-checked with the Noble Lord, Lord Panic, for accuracy?
I'm not sure we could afford his fees. We will, of course, as the Noble Lady would expect, abide by the law.
My Lords, I'm sure the Noble Lord Panic would be pro bono, but could I ask my noble friend to confirm that in the unhappy event, and for me it would be an unhappy event, that no deal is reached by the 31st of October, the Prime Minister will abide by the law that Parliament has passed?
I'm happy to confirm to the Noble Lord the answer I just gave earlier. Of course, the Government will abide by the law.
My Lords, I am not sure that the Noble Lord, the Minister, has actually answered my noble friend Lady Hayter's question. We of course assume that the Government will abide by the law, but her question was would a second letter be sent, saying please to the EU, please don't accept our request. Can he give a categorical assurance that the Government will not do that and will not seek to go around the wording of the law which was passed by this House?
I can give the Noble Lord a categorical assurance that the Government will abide by the law. We write all sorts of letters to all sorts of people all of the time. I'm sure letter writing will continue, even in no deal. And I can go no further than just repeat what I say, that of course we are a law-abiding government and we will abide by it.
My noble friend will confirm, I hope, that it is the government's intention to leave the European Union on the 31st of October with a deal. That being the case, Parliament has probably no more than 3 weeks in which to debate such a deal, and in the case of the other place, to approve such a deal. But at present, we have no details with which to discuss it. Will my noble friend give the House the papers that have been shared with the European Commission so that we might examine what this deal looks like, and if not, why not?
Well, my noble friend is, of course, correct that it's the government's intention to get a deal, but negotiations are ongoing at the moment. I'm sure he will understand from his time in government that we are unable to share confidential negotiating papers at the moment, but you can rest assured that as soon as we get a deal, we will publish the full documentation.
Lords, could the Noble Lord, the Minister, say whether or not the government thinks that they would be abiding by the law if they were to send 2 letters instead of 1.
I can see that noble lords today have a great fondness for the work of the International Post Office. We will abide by the law.
Should there be no deal agreed by the 31st of October, is the Minister aware there's considerable concern about families on low incomes who may be faced by increased prices on staple foods? Has the government very carefully considered the possible adverse impact on those families and have clear plans about ensuring that these families are not adversely impacted by a no-deal Brexit?
We have indeed given extensive thought and consideration to all of the possible impacts of no deal, and if the noble lord wishes to stick around till later on this afternoon, we will be updating the House further.
What is the... Oh, sorry.
I agree that in some ways the collapse of Thomas Cook provides a dress rehearsal for what might happen in the event of a no deal, that certainly a no deal crash out would be very damaging to this country, but it would also, as in the case of the Thomas Cook collapse, have reverberations all over Europe, leading to job losses and financial losses in all kinds of unexpected places.
No, I'm afraid I wouldn't agree with my noble lord that there is any parallel between the two events. The collapse of Thomas Cook, about which we are to get a statement, is totally unrelated to Brexit. I was in the Department of Transport when Monarch Airlines collapsed 2 years ago. I assume that noble lords wish to equate that with Brexit as well. But I think for some noble lords, if the sun doesn't rise in the morning, it would be the fault of Brexit. But I agree with my noble lord, my noble friend, that we need to make all the appropriate preparations. But our focus is on getting a deal if we possibly can. But if not, then we should leave on the 31st of October, and we will do all we can to mitigate the effects of a no deal. And we will be saying more about that later this afternoon.
Lords, what is the... No.
Would the noble lord agree with me that Parliament has, justifiably or not, seen its reputation sink very, very low over the last few months? And one of the ways of dealing with that is transparency. And would he therefore, regardless of how many letters there may or may not be, will he undertake that the government will be completely transparent and honest in the spirit and not merely the letter of the law about the actions they take over the next few weeks in connection with an extension?
We always endeavour to be as transparent as possible with regard to these matters, whilst, of course, still preserving the confidentiality of the negotiations.
In light of the Supreme Court judgment and in light of the Minister's answer, to allay the fears that there may be multiple letters, or letters signed by officials and not the Prime Minister, or other ways where the government may seek to not abide by the spirit and the letter of the law, there's nothing preventing the government now from publishing a statement as to how it would abide by the law and the mechanisms. Will the government do that?
No matter how many times noble lords wish to press me on this, I'm afraid I have given the answer that I'm going to give, that we will, of course, abide by the law of the land. We are a law-abiding government. The democracy in this country rests on adherence to the rule of law, and we will abide by it.
Lords, on another aspect of this, what is the parliamentary authority for the huge expenditure on the advertising campaign, Get Ready for Brexit, when the House of Commons has decided specifically against a no-deal exit on the 31st of October and has not decided in favour of a deal for exit on the 31st of October? So on what basis is that money being spent?
Well, the noble lord is an experienced parliamentarian, so he knows very well the answer he's going to get on this, that under the Notification of Withdrawal Act, this House, the House of Commons, voted to invoke Article 50, and the consequence of Article 50 is that we leave 2 years after the expiration of Article 50 unless there are extensions granted. So the legal default remains that we leave on October the 31st. And the noble lord can shake his head rather. I don't know whether he voted for that legislation or not, but the majority did in both houses. That is now the law of the land, and therefore we have to assume that that is the legal default in the absence of anything else happening.